Great. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here to talk to you all about Microsoft's not so easy DevOps transformation, right? So before we begin, let me do a very quick introduction. My name is Abel Wang. I'm a principal cloud advocate and also the DevOps lead here at Microsoft. I've been writing code for, seems like forever now, 20 some years now. And really, I'm super lucky right now because I get to lead a fantastic team of 5 DevOps practitioners, and our sole charter is to help everybody get into Azure using DevOps best practices. So if you have any questions at all, we are a resource. Please do use us. And the way to get a hold of us is do not email me because I never read my email, but I am on Twitter all the time. So if you tweet at us and hashtag it LOECDA, that will literally light up a team room, and I will get somebody from my team or myself. We will answer that question and we will help you. So again, we are a resource. Please do use us. All right, so today we're going to talk about Microsoft's DevOps transformation. But what exactly is DevOps, right? Because if you ask 10 people what DevOps is, you're going to get 20 different answers. And I'm not saying everyone else's definition is wrong, but just to frame this conversation, let me give you Microsoft's definition of DevOps. For us, DevOps is something very specific. DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to your end users. Now, I said this really carefully because every word has meaning, right? I didn't say continuously deliver code, because what will that give us? Piles and piles of code sitting on some source control system. Who cares, right? And notice I didn't even say continuously deliver features, because I can be delivering feature after feature, sprint after sprint. But again, if this is not what my end users need, why am I wasting time, right? So what is important is we need to continuously deliver value. And the reason why this is so incredibly important is because the speed of business is so fast. If we don't move at DevOps speed, we will be out-innovated. So this was a very painful lesson for Microsoft, for us to learn. Like Flor said earlier, we used to deliver software once every 3 years, right? And the biggest reason why we did that is because every time we pushed to production, guess what? It hurt. So one of the first lessons we had to learn when we went on this DevOps transformation is if it hurts, don't avoid it. You need to do it more. Now, our natural instinct, our natural reaction is if it hurts, we tend to avoid it, right? So pushing into production was super painful, so we would put it off. So I would have a push to make and I'd be like, oh, maybe I'll put it off and we'll wait till the end of the month and then we'll batch everything up together. And when the end of the month will come, we'll be like, maybe we should push it off a little bit further. Let's wait until 3 months and so on and so forth. Until eventually, instead of just pushing one little code change that I made, now we have to push this massive amounts of change. So of course things would be breaking, right? So this was a horrible habit that we had to break ourselves of, which is, again, if it hurts, you don't want to avoid it, you want to do it more. Because if you do it more, you start getting better and better and better at it. So the first time we built out our DevOps pipelines and we pressed go, guess what? It failed miserably. But that's okay because we immediately went into our pipelines, tried to fix everything, and then the next time we tried it again. And it got a little bit further. And then we fixed the pipelines a little bit more and we tried it again and it got a little bit better until today, it's pretty much we just push a button and away it goes. We just let it go, right? Because we know it works. It works every single time. So important lesson, if it hurts, you need to do it more. All right, so our transformation was kind of interesting because, again, we were a box software product and now we're turning into a service, right? So every 3 to 4 years, we put out a new version. How do you transform from that type of mentality into a DevOps world, right? Where we're continuously delivering value. Very difficult to do. And it all started with our organizational chart. So I love this slide because I think it's hilarious. It's a joke. It totally is a joke. But like all good jokes, there is a grain of truth to all good jokes, right? So if you look at the Microsoft organizational chart, you have deep, deep, deep hierarchies, and they're all separated by these little islands. And each of these islands, well, they kind of represent one particular product group, right? So you would have your Office team, you would have your TFS team, you would have your SharePoint team, you would have your Windows team, right? And we're in each one of those teams, again, they're their own little island, and they all have guns pointed at each other, right? Because in our mind back then, if we competed really, really highly against each other, it should bring out the best in all of us, right? At least that's what we thought it would do. But it turns out what it did was it created a very toxic culture where trying to collaborate and work across boundaries was almost impossible. So luckily, we got a new CEO by the name of Satya Nadella. And he immediately saw this as a problem, and he said, we need to be one Microsoft. We need to rip down all these walls between all of these groups. You all need to put your guns away and learn how to work together. And then we ran into our very first problem, which was, since we were all little islands, and we could do whatever we wanted in our islands, we each had our own engineering system. So we each had our own source control system. We each had our build system. We each had our own way of tracking work and running our tests and doing all that stuff. And that worked okay when we were islands, but once we tried to reach across the aisle to all these different teams, it created such friction in our organization that Satya literally told us, we need to decide on one engineering system for all of Microsoft so we can get rid of this artificial boundary. And so, of course, now we were all starting to argue about, what engineering system should we use? And Satya brought up a point. He says, don't we have a DevOps system? And I immediately raised my hand and said, yes, we do. It's called TFS, because back then it was called TFS. And then he asked a very embarrassing question, which is, who at Microsoft uses TFS? And nobody raised their hands because none of us did. And Satya was like, okay, how can you build a world-class DevOps system if you don't use it yourself? So he sent out an email and told everyone, guess what? You all have to end up using TFS. You're going to have to learn to love it. If you don't, then start fixing it so you do. Make it a world-class engineering system. So we did. And that is literally what we use today. And we use it for everything, right? We use Azure Boards, which is the work item tracking. There's Azure Pipelines for the CI/CD. We've got Azure Repos to hold our Git repositories. We've got test plans to run our manual tests. We use artifacts for our artifact repository. And all of this is done across all of Microsoft now. And we know Azure DevOps Services works extremely well. Because this slide that you're looking at, this is actually an old slide from a couple of years ago. So the numbers are even more crazy. But these numbers that you're seeing, these are the numbers that we use internally for Azure DevOps Services. And remember, our version of Azure DevOps Services is no different than your version of Azure DevOps Services. Guess what? It's the exact same thing. And again, these numbers, this is only internal Microsoft. We're not even counting all our customers that use this system as well. So yes, 96,000 engineers at Microsoft use Azure DevOps Services. 6.3 million builds kick off every single month. 5 million work items happens all the time. 163,000 deployments every single day, right? So how do we know Azure DevOps Services scales? This is why. Because we literally use it every single day. And by dogfooding, by using this, we started improving this product dramatically because we started hitting all the pain points that our customers were hitting, right? So now that it's affecting us, we better go fix it really quickly. All right. So our journey started in 2005, and it actually started in 2004 when we started writing TFS. And it took us so long to write it that we didn't even get it out the door until 2006, right? However, every 3 years, we would put out a new version of the software. So a new version of TFS, we'd put out a new version of Office, Windows, whatever, right? Around the 2012 timeframe, we noticed a really disturbing trend, which was our competitors were innovating so quickly, they were out-innovating us. And that was kind of problematic. So we decided, instead of putting out a new version every 3 years, what we would do is we would have every 3 to 4 months, we would have an update be kicked out. And then we would send these updates to our customers, and then they could go ahead and install these updates. And that put us in a very weird spot because all of a sudden we were in this position where we were moving too quickly and we were still moving too slow, both at the same time. So we were moving too quickly because in order to install this update, we had to send it to the enterprises that were using TFS. They would have to bring TFS down, install the update. It would take approximately a day, maybe 2 days before they can get everything back up again. And they're looking at us going, you want me to bring TFS down every 3 months? Are you crazy? So what they ended up doing was they stopped installing the updates because it was a serious pain. And then they would fall further and further behind. We were moving too slowly still because even if you slapped on those updates every 3 to 4 months, we were still being out-innovated by our competitors. So we knew we had to move to the cloud. So that's what we did. And once we moved to the cloud, the pace started picking up dramatically. Where today, wow, we move really quickly. Every 3 weeks, like clockwork, we put new version of TFS, or I'm sorry, Azure DevOps Services. This is like the 10th name change. Every 3 weeks, we put new code, push it out into production for Azure DevOps Services, like clockwork. And what we don't tell people, but I'm going to tell the world today, is that every single day we are pushing out multiple bug fixes as well. So we are pretty advanced DevOps-wise at Microsoft by now. And in fact, I love showing this, right? This is our definition of done. So you need to have a unified view of what done is across all of your teams. And for us, if we get a user story, yes, you have to complete the user story, you have to write unit tests for the user story, but it's not considered done until it is pushed all the way out into production. And it's in production, gathering telemetry and sending it back to us. And only then do we consider a user story done, right? So I love sharing this because this is a very, very advanced definition of done. And oftentimes people come up to me and ask me, well, should that be our definition of done? And if you're just starting on your DevOps journey, absolutely not, right? Because remember, the DevOps journey is just that. It is a journey of continuous improvements. So you start out small, you fix what hurts the most, and then you just go on to the next thing. And it's an iterative process, right? So we didn't start from there, but by today, we're pretty advanced DevOps-wise. However, to get there, we had to make some dramatic changes. So first and foremost, the way that we were organized before, remember, you saw that deep, deep, deep hierarchy. So we had a very deep hierarchy, and we had 3 groups of people, basically. We had program managers, we had developers, and we had testers. And we had huge amounts of friction between all 3 of these groups, but especially between our devs and our QA teams. To give you an example, I would go into work. There'd be a bug list that QA found that I wrote. I would look at it, and I would spend a day basically going through that bug list trying to prove that the QA testers were wrong. I didn't write a bug, that they tested it wrong, right? So there was constantly this friction in this fight. Sometimes I was right, and sometimes I was wrong, right? But it was a lot of time wasted. So that was kind of problematic. Another problem that we had is we ended up creating a very, very toxic culture with our QA teams and our devs. And I was part of this, and I didn't mean to do this. But intent doesn't matter. It's the impact that matters. And what ended up happening is we created a second-class citizenship with our QA teams. Give you an example. I would have a position open on my team. I would interview a person, and I would say something like, wow, this person, I really like the person. I don't think they were technically quite good enough to be on my team, but they would be great on the QA team, right? So like I said, that created a second-class citizenship, and all of a sudden you have the devs walking around going, well, we're the devs. We're special. We're super special. This was horrible. So we wanted to get rid of that. And really, the reason why we needed to get rid of that is because it created so much friction. It was slowing things down tremendously. So what we ended up doing is we collapsed those groups. And instead of having developers and QAs, we now have engineers. So what that meant is we had to cross-train everybody. We had to take our QA team, we had to teach them how to code, how to write automated UI tests, how to do those types of things. We had to take our developers and we had to tell them, shake them really hard and say, look, you need to pay attention to quality. Now, quality is every engineer's responsibility, not just the QA team. So this was a very tough pill to swallow for both the developers and the QA team. I can't speak for the QA team, but I can imagine being told, well, guess what? You now need to learn to code. That's kind of crazy. From my point of view, though, as a developer, what they told me is now QA is my responsibility. I rebelled against that tremendously because I still had the mentality of I'm a coder, I sling code, I am not good at testing, I just don't know how to test, I'm not born to test, I'm just bad at it, right? I fought so hard against that. Eventually, management told me, look, if you feel that strongly about it, maybe you need to find another team. Maybe you need to find another company to be in. And so then I looked at how much stock I had and I went, maybe I should learn about this quality thing, right? So Microsoft cross-trained all of us and they trained me how to build quality into my code as I'm writing it, as opposed to trying to tack on the quality at the end of the dev cycle, right? So this was very hard to do. And we suffered attrition. We suffered 20% loss, right? There were people from the QA side, there were people from the dev side that just could not make that change. And as horrible as it was for us to suffer 20% attrition, lose 20% of our engineers, this was a price that leadership was willing to pay because they realized that if these people would not change their attitudes, they would do nothing but slow us down. So now, if they wanted to leave, we would help them find other positions at Microsoft, but we now need to bring in people that buy into this new mindset from the beginning, and we can move much, much quicker. So the other thing that we did as well is we created what is called feature teams. So a feature team consists of a program manager, it consists of engineers, and again, a big reason of why we created these feature teams is that it let us move at a much quicker rate than the way that we were organized before. One of the things that I love about it is we are so much closer to our customers because of that as well, right? And I'll dive into that in a bit as well. But the way that we used to be organized was basically in layers, right? And the way that we designed our application was in layers. And I'm sure a lot of people do this, right? You have your UI layer, an API layer, a data layer, and you have teams, and the teams would be a UI team, an API team, a data team, so on and so forth, right? This worked okay for us, but two big problems because of that. If a customer wanted a change or they wanted to give us feedback on work item tracking, let's say they wanted us to change something on the Kanban boards, who do they contact? Because that feature literally flows through 3 different teams, right? Makes it really hard for our customers to talk to us. The other thing is it was very difficult to make changes quickly because any change now to a particular feature, that would require you to coordinate between 3 separate teams, which was very, very difficult. So instead of doing things in layers like this, what we ended up doing is let's do things in slices. Let's do things vertically. Because now a feature team owns that feature all up. They own everything in that feature. They own the UI layer. They own the API layer. They own the data layer. They own the quality. They own the responsibility of finding what the user story should be and what we should be building next. They even own the DevOps pipelines that deploy their microservices out into production, right? They own everything about that specific feature. And because we do things this way, now we can move much, much, much quicker. And again, we are so much closer to our customers. So when our customers contact us through any types of means, whether it's through developer community, whether it's through user voice, whether it's through Stack Overflow, or even Twitter, well, guess what? We can respond to them super, super fast because now there is one PM that is in charge of one specific feature. And you literally can reach out on Twitter, find the PM and say, hey, so-and-so, I have a problem with this particular feature. And you tell that to them and they can immediately respond, right? The other thing that we did with our teams, with our feature teams, is our feature teams basically consist of about 10 to 12 engineers They are co-located in the same room. So of course, this is pre-COVID, this is pre-pandemic. We were all one team was co-located in the same room. So in today's plague world, we aren't working at the office anymore. We're working from home, but we're all more or less from the same time zone, and that works out pretty well for us. Right? The other thing is that for when you're on a team, each team, you can be on the team. Well, you have to be on a team for 12 months, up to 18 months. But at the end of that, you have the ability to go and pick whatever team that you want to be on. So this is really kind of cool. So at the end of every year, we have what we call the Great Yellow Sticky Note exercise, where the program managers, they put on a dog and pony show and they say, join my team, look at this, look at the cool technology you get to use, look at the new JavaScript framework you get to play with, look at all these customers that use our particular product, blah, 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 join my team. And then as developers, we kind of walk around and we use a sticky notepad and we put our names on, okay, this team is my first choice, this team's my second choice, this team's my third choice, right? And then through some crazy algorithm, you get assigned to one of the teams that you pick. So what we found out is this has been amazing for our engineers. They love having the freedom of picking which teams they want to be on. Most of the time, our engineers want to stay on the same team. They love the culture that the team created. They love their management. They love everything about it. But 20% of our engineers at the end of the year decide, hey, I want to try something new. So again, just by giving our engineers the possibility of being able to change teams, this has made them so incredibly happy. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we organize our sprints. So before we do that, I should probably tell you how many teams we have, right? So we have these feature teams. We have about 50 to 60 of these feature teams, and all total, we have about 800 engineers. We used to have it where they could decide on their particular cadence. So everyone had different cadence for their sprints. That turned into absolute chaos. So now what we say is our sprints, they're going to be 3 weeks long, and everybody needs to have the same cadence. We start at the same date and we end at the same date. So that has worked out pretty well for us. At the beginning of the sprint, we do sprint planning. And in order to communicate across all of these teams, and we are on 2 different coastlines on the United States, on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and we also have teams in India as well. So the way that we manage all of that, we can't have actually physical meetings and have all 800 people there. So at the beginning of our sprint, we do sprint planning, and we send out a sprint planning email to everybody on the team, on the big, large team, all 800 engineers, to tell them this is what we are going to be working on for this particular sprint. At the end of the sprint, we go ahead and send out another email. And in this email, we actually have a video that says, this is what we did. And go ahead, let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at what we actually did. So this email, we use Azure DevOps Services to track all of our work. So this email basically gets generated all by itself, right? This is a feature inside of Azure DevOps Services. It can take your work items for a sprint and shove it into an email. So this is our plan. This is what we have accomplished, and we include this video. This video has turned into a brilliant way for us to communicate across vast distances, right? And across all of these hundreds and hundreds of teams. So when we first started, we did send things at a user story level, but that was so much detail crammed into each one of these emails. If you didn't have enough context to really understand what the user stories were, they were impossible to figure out what they were. Basically, the email was gibberish unless I was super close to the team that actually sent it. So instead of working at the user story level for these emails now, we now do it at an epic level, at a much higher level, and this works out pretty good for us. The other way that we do planning is, like I said, each sprint is 3 weeks long, right? At the end of every 4 sprints now, we call this a quarter, at the end of every 4 sprints, all the team leads that are working on related teams, so teams that are closely linked together, they will get together and have a meeting. And during that meeting, the team leads basically talk about, oh, this is the stuff that we've done, this is stuff that we're going to do, and all sorts of interesting things get shaken out during those talks. For instance, things like in the last meeting, a sister team of mine, the lead was telling me, oh, we're going to build this UI widget to do blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, wait. I just built a widget that's really similar. Maybe you guys can use it, right? And so they looked at what we did and they were like, that's great. We can just use it and add a couple changes. Perfect, right? So we do a lot of that stuff in our quarterly meetings. Every 6 months is a semester. And at the end of every 6 months, we go ahead and reevaluate our 12-month strategy and we reprioritize our 12-month strategy plan. So if you want to think about it, you can say, okay, at the sprint and quarter level, we're looking at things from a user story level or a product backlog item level. At a semester level, now we're looking at things on a feature level, and then across a 12-month span, then we're looking at things in an epic. So for a while there, our leadership, they would look at all of this stuff, right? So they would go into our sprints to see what we're doing. But what happened was whenever leadership would look at the sprint backlogs of the individual teams, they would want to micromanage. It's like they could not help themselves. But the problem with our leadership teams trying to micromanage us is that, again, they did not have enough context to micromanage effectively. So then we were wasting massive amounts of time giving them enough context for them to realize why their micromanagement directions made no sense whatsoever. So this was such a pain in the butt for us, and it would waste so much time that we finally just banned leadership from looking at product backlogs. They're not allowed to look at that. What do they need to look at? They need to look at the semester view, and they need to look at the 12-month view, right? Because their job is to set strategy for us and not micromanage. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was quality, because when you make that DevOps transformation, quality becomes really, really tough, right? So the old way of doing things is you would write code, you'd code, until some arbitrary date, guess what? Your code complete, you're done. Pizza party, everybody celebrates, but it's a joke because you're not done yet, because this is when QA starts testing, and then they will find that mountain of bugs. So this dotted line that you're seeing, what that is the det line, or the bugs that you find. So of course, as they test, they find more and more bugs, and you have a mountain, then you burn that mountain of bugs down, and then you rinse and repeat. The problem is this picture right here is best case scenario for your det. Because usually what happens is you have this mountain of bugs, you try to burn it down, there's too many, you burn down until quality is good enough, and then you keep going, right? So your line trends upwards until your application is so incredibly fragile that anytime you try to fix a bug, you create 7 more bugs. Or you try to add a feature and everything's breaking all over the place. And it can get so bad that you literally cannot add any new features because you're spending all of your time and effort just keeping this app going, just fixing things because it is so incredibly fragile. So when this happens, this is a great example of technical debt that is spun out of control. So what we have done now is different, a little bit different than before. So instead of just letting that sprint count or that bug count build up, we now have a rule that says you must burn down all of your bugs within your sprint. So if you find your bugs, guess what? You have to fix the bugs within that sprint. So this has actually worked out incredibly well for us. We have this concept of a bug bar, right? So this idea of you cannot carry any bugs into the next sprint, this is so important to us that we created this concept of a bug bar, where every engineer on your team is allowed to carry over only 4 bugs, right? So why 4? We made some calculations, and our teams, on an average, they can fix 4 bugs in 3 weeks. So in theory, we can spend 1 sprint, and then our product would be bug-free, right? So that's the theory. So when we did this, so the way that we use this bug bar now is if you have more than 4 bugs at the end of your sprint, that's okay. You don't get punished, but for the next sprint, you are not allowed to add any new features. What you have to do is burn down your bugs, right? So this is so important. We've actually created a dashboard. So again, we look at this dashboard. We can really quickly see the teams that are over the bug bar. Those are the teams that are in red. And now for the next sprint, they cannot add any new features. They have to burn down their bugs until they're underneath that bug bar. And once they are, then they can go on. Right. So again, this is not punishment. This is just a way for us to make sure that we do not carry too much debt. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is what we measure, because what you measure is incredibly important. Oh my goodness, right? What you measure matters. And the reason why that it matters is because if you measure incorrectly, it's going to affect how your engineers behave. So what we tell people, or what we end up doing, is we want to measure outcome and not the output. Because if you try to measure output, engineers are going to try to game the system, right? So for instance, burn down charts are important. Percent of code coverage is very important. However, if I know my bonus is tied to that code coverage number, I guarantee you that that number is going to be 100% all the time. My unit tests might not do a thing except touch every line of code, but guess what? That number will be 100% all the time. So all of a sudden, if you do it that way, that number means nothing anymore, right? So you cannot use these numbers for promotions, for bonuses, for performances, and you cannot use these numbers to punish, because your engineers are going to start gaming the system. So the way that you work around that is find what matter. Find the outcomes that you want and start measuring those. So then things like, how long does it take for us to have an idea and turn that idea into code and then have that code pushed all the way out into production, right? That cycle time, very, very important. How long does it take us to detect a problem? And then once we do detect that problem, how long does it take us to work through the system and get it all the way out into production, right? So those things start becoming incredibly important to us. So again, measure outcome and not output. And this is such a huge deal that we do still track performance. But again, like I said earlier, our bonuses, our performance is not based on these performance metrics. We do not use these numbers to reward or to punish our developers. Again, if you do, your developers are going to game the system. However, I do use these numbers because when I look at them, I can quickly see developers on my team if they're starting to drop in terms of production. And if they are, I will go up to them and I'll say things like, hey, I noticed your production has dropped. What's going on? Is it because we just changed over to a new JavaScript framework and you need more training? Because if you need more training, I can get you more training. Or maybe it's just because it's brand new and you needed a sprint to kind of figure things out, but you're okay now. And if that's the case, perfect. Have that. Or are you having problems at home? Because if you are, do you need some time off, right? So again, we use these numbers to try to help our engineers. So someone once asked me, how do you make sure your engineers end up doing the right thing, right? And I think this is a great question, because they're like, if you don't reward them or punish them that way, how do you get them to do the right thing? And the way that we get them to do the right thing is, if they don't do the right thing, life turns really miserable for them. And I'll share with you how. One of our biggest fears is if Azure DevOps Services gets a live site incident, because ultimately, Azure DevOps Services holds our customers' source codes, their CI/CD pipelines, their plans. If we go down, they can't do their business, so we cannot go down. So if there's a live site incident, it is a huge deal. And when that happens, Scott Guthrie gets called, right? Our EVP. He gets a call, he gets on the phone and calls down his command chain until it reaches the program manager of the feature that is breaking. And then that program manager is going to call the two people that are on support. And this role is so horrible that we have to cycle through it, and we trade this role. So yeah, it is awful. And I'll tell you why it's awful. You get this call and it's at 2 a.m. because for whatever reason, live site incidences always happen at 2 a.m, no matter what time zone you're in. You get this call, you're super tired, you have to jump on your computer, get in a call bridge, and on this call bridge, you have the entire management chain now looking at you, and every 5 minutes, you have Scott Guthrie asking you, hey, Did you find the problem? Is it fixed yet? And it is horrible. And you are not allowed off this call until you fix the problem. You slap a Band-Aid on the problem, right? And so you don't see the problem in production. But you're still not allowed off this call bridge until you found the root cause. And then you've come up with a plan. And with this plan, you now have a plan to make sure that this bug will never, ever happen again. And only then are you allowed off this call. So because of that, right, this is such a horrible, horrible
Can you hear me?
experience. Yes. Yes.
Hi. Yeah, we're running quite a bit over time at the moment. So I was wondering if we could, I mean, your presentation is fantastic, but we've run through our Q&A time. So I was wondering if we could just kind of bring this to a close, and then we can move on to the next presentation. We have our next speaker waiting. We're about 20 minutes over at the moment. Thank you so much.
Maybe you can answer some questions then in the Q&A.
Yeah, we have
really
a
amazing.
couple of very quick questions, but I'll let you finish off your
A lot
point.
of good questions.
And if you can just finish off what you were saying, and then we can ask a quick question, and then if anyone has any more questions, we can just cover those in the Crowdcast chat.
So those live site incidents, it's so bad to be on that call. Because of that, we don't ever want to be on those calls. So therefore, we do the right thing so we don't end up on the call. We go through pull requests very carefully. We write unit tests like you wouldn't believe because we don't ever want to be on those calls again. So how do you get your developers to do the right things? Make them feel the pain of their own horrible code. All right, this slide that I have right here, this shows everything that we have done, that we have changed. The one last point that I want to make is that, you know what? When I tell the story, it seems like we made that change really quickly and it was easy. It was not. It was painful. We stumbled. It was super, super painful. We suffered massive amounts of attrition. DevOps journey is exactly what that word means. It is a journey of continuous improvement, of incremental change. So start your DevOps journey, and eventually you will reach DevOps Nirvana. All right, thank you all very much.